Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. I obviously have a very warm relationship with Manchester University. The first time I was invited here about 2 or 3 years ago to speak about the violence inherent within pornography. I received so many rape and death threats that I had to pull out because, of course, my presence on campus would have been an act of violence to trans women. Now, let me just go back to the offending article in 2004. Milo is not quite right when he says that I have basically taken it up the twins every year on a regular basis, apologising about it. I've apologised twice publicly for the tone of my article that was in Guardian Weekend by saying that I recognise that I was very immature to write it in that style at the time. I wasn't actually a journalist, I was still in academia, which was the worst kind of thing that you could ever admit. And I said a couple of things such as transgender people tend to be so extreme and rely on stereotypes. And I firmly believe that gender is a social construct. And I firmly believe that we're not born liking pink or dolls, and that if you like playing with trucks and you're a girl, then you must transition. So I was very clear about how this relies on the worst anti-feminist gender stereotypes. And I said, imagine a world inhabited just by trans people. It would look like the set of Greece. Now, the point I was making was that these are stereotypes, right? That feminists have built feminism on. Yes, modern feminism really has a problem with free speech. But you see, there are many, many different ways of being a feminist. Most of them are wrong, right? The one that is right is a feminism that annoys men. It doesn't alienate men, it doesn't upset men if you're decent men. But it does annoy you a little bit like good anti-racist white people in South Africa living under the apartheid regime were annoyed when they lost their black servants that they treated really well. Because it annoys men, proper feminism, the feminism that I subscribe to and have done since 1979, because it means they have to give up some of their privilege. Now these modern feminists, the choice feminists, the fun feminists, the ones that don't want to upset men, they go around slut marching and getting their tits out for trafficking, and God knows what else. Men love it. Men love this kind of pro-pornography, pro-sex work, pro-wearing the veil, pro-anything that actually means that men keep their power. And that is why, everybody, that these modern feminists, such as the one in the women's officer here, the ones at Goldsmiths, and all of the men that are heads of the feminist societies and universities these days, some of whom, of course, will identify as women just for the day, that is why they do not like me and call me whorephobic, transphobic, biphobic, polyamoryphobic, Islamophobic, every other phobia that you can imagine, because they are reactionaries. They are the new right wing. They support, as they did recently at Goldsmiths, Islamist fascist men who wish to stone adulterous women to death over a free speech feminist campaigner, Mariam Namazi, who's an Iranian exile. They support those pimps who call themselves sex workers and say that prostitution is great for women over survivors of the sex industry who say this is abuse. So it's all gone very Alice through the looking glass. In fact, on a bad day, it's a little bit like a cross between George Orwell's 1984 and The Life of Brian, which no doubt you will definitely be too young to remember, but look it up, it's great fun. Now, Milo already talked about how he wasn't banned and I was when we tried to come here to speak previously, and it has really been to my benefit, because by not banning Milo, but banning the feminist activist who has campaigned against sexual violence for 35 years, they kind of showed that this is bigotry towards radical feminism. So this is a hatred of radical feminists by the new choice fun feminists, right? The kind of sex posy ones, you know? So this was really clear, because this is what Jess Lishek said, the Student Union Women's Officer, who is a major bell end. And she said, and the grammar's terrible, she abhorrently argues that trans women, I argue really well, but she abhorrently argues that trans women should be excluded from women-only spaces. No, I don't. Whether that be through feminist organising or women's sexual and domestic violence services. Apparently, I have been spouting these arguments for decades. I have been on a crusade against trans women forever. I have written 4 articles about transgender, one of which had some offensive lines in, if you're not going to have a sense of humour, right? You call me a fat, ugly lesbian all the time. That's a reasonable argument to make.
You say I'm hung like a gnat.
Yeah, no man, I say he's hung like a tic tac, right? We all know no man would have me, that's why I have to be a lesbian. We're not the ones with no sense of fucking humour. So this woman, this women's officer here, said I've been on a crusade. I've written hundreds of articles. I have done thousands of hours of unpaid work challenging men's violence against women. What happens? I turn up at a university to speak not about trans issues, but about violence against women and children. And they're all out there, the sex posies, the transgender activists. I have to tell you, I have more transgender friends than I do in the little cabal and their allies, all of whom are just wanting the kind of kudos and the tick box of saying, I'm so cool. This is nonsense and it has to be stopped. Now the reason why we have an obsession in universities with the trans issue, as well as the pro-sex work stuff, and it's all linked together in some horrific kind of libertarian, anti-feminist cesspit, is because it gives just white privileged men, who don't really like my sort of feminist, and who can blame them, the right to stand there and scream transphobe, whorephobe, at me, right, a human rights defender, and still be seen on the side of the progressives. And this is why it's taken off so well. This is why we have men who are in charge of feminist societies who are sending out emails screaming transphobe to women in the feminist society because they've circulated an article that I've written about why we have such a low conviction rate for rape, or why we find it almost impossible to convict someone who's raped a child. So just because it's an article written by me. This is also happening to other radical feminists, both of my generation, older and much younger. It's happening across the board, and you have to speak out about it. This is not feminists shutting down free speech. It's pseudo-neo-feminists, the new reactionaries, who are not at all human rights defenders. They're capitulating to the most ridiculous, the most reactionary of viewpoints, such as there's a female brain and a male brain. The veil is a symbol of freedom for women. There are no women in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan who've ever seen it as oppressive. They're just choosing it. I'm sure I've got one more point to make and I can't find it. Okay. So, I was delighted to see recently that not only is every single thing that is written about me on the internet, most of which is lies, all of it is completely irrelevant and pointless, and you wonder if these people really could get a life. Now has a trigger warning, of a very special trigger warning. It doesn't just say, as it used to, Julie Bindel, trigger warning, cisphobia, cisgendered transphobia, polyamory phobia, biphobia, violence towards trans women, negativity about non-monogamy, whatever. It just says, trigger warning, Julie Bindel. I have made it.